Okay, it's three. It is 3 o'clock. So we're going to get started, and as we usually do, we're going to open up in prayer. And Representative Kennard, would you open us in prayer?
Thank you, Father, for this day that you have made. We pray, God, that we will serve your people well in the state of Georgia. May we tap into a wisdom that's greater than ours. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Okay, well, welcome to 2020 session. Since we do not have any new members, we're not going to need to introduce any of the folks up here or go over house rules since nothing has changed. You've got the rules in your folder. Oh, you do not have the rules in your folder, but they are the same as last year. Do want to introduce a couple of folks that have been very helpful to me in this committee and will be helpful to you if you choose to utilize them. To my immediate left is Molly Aziz. She's the policy analyst for industry and labor and is awesome on taking on tasks to do research so she and keeping us very organized. Sean Marie Story is no stranger. She's hiding in the back. She's the legal counsel for this committee. Hayden Latheran is on the very end, is the intern in my office. And so she unfortunately got the political bug young in her life. And so she is this your first year? Second?
This is my first year at the Georgia General.
Okay. So, and then Vanessa Turner is my admin, and if ever need to get in touch with me, she can usually find me. My door is always open. If you don't believe that, you hadn't been hanging around the last 2 days. So, we do not have a sign-up sheet yet. I'm going to put that out later. I'm going to do that a little different, and here's why. We are not, to put some of you at ease, we are not going to take a vote today on this bill. And the reason is we've had a lot of discussions the last 2 days from all the stakeholders, and so we want to make sure everybody's on board and not feeling like that something is being forced. So, but we're close. We're very close, and so the bill you hear from, we'll discuss where we're close and where we're not. So right now, we're going to let the author speak on the bill, and then after that, Bobby Potter is going to speak, and he serves on the advisory council and has been doing this for 4 decades. So if there's anything you need to know, he's a good one to ask. So we're going to let him give some perspective there. And then after that, if you've got a question or if you want to sign up, we're going to bring that to you and allow. But the reason I pulled that, I didn't want to have a parade of people saying that they were for or against the bill when we don't really know what the final version of the bill is. So that's why I did that. But I'll never deny anybody a chance to talk. So if you want to, we'll certainly allow you to do that as long as we're out of here till at 4, because that's how long we have the room. Instead of giving any pre-comments about how we got there, I think Tom and Bobby will probably cover that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the author of the bill, Representative Tom Kirby. Where'd that go? Okay, go ahead, Tom.
All right, thank you. And you noticed I readjusted the podium a little bit because I'm probably going to talk to the people out here as much as I am the committee, because on the committee, this is a 30-second presentation. There's not much to this bill. It's pretty simple, and shouldn't be that complicated. All right. House Bill 474. All right. I have to let people by though. First thing, let me start off. If those who know me well know that at times I can get a little snarky. I can get a little spiteful, and I've spent the last 6-7 months pretty ticked off about this. All right, and I've been wondering why, and I want to thank everybody who sent something in writing, because writing helped me understand you don't get it. I thought about it. I've coined my own term. It's called TADS. It's an acronym, TADS. That stands for Tillery Amendment Derangement Syndrome. Most of you know the Tillery Amendment I'm talking about. And I think some people got so bent out of shape, so as Manfred Mann would say, so revved up like a deuce, they haven't throttled back yet and they haven't heard what we've been saying. I actually had a person who's got TAD so bad this week, when I explained what the bill is about, they said, no, that's not what your bill is about. I don't know what my own bill's about? Really? It's amazing. And these letters, be honest, and I'll tell you right now, most of these, I don't believe this is really your position. Because when you say you're opposed to HB 474, let me tell you in very simple terms, what you're saying is you don't believe it's the General Assembly's job to make law, and you really don't like the idea of having rules made in sunshine. You prefer backroom closed deals where nobody sees them till they're adopted. That's what these letters say. We oppose you put all kinds of reasons why you oppose 474, but they have nothing to do with the bill. That's all the bill's about. There's three things in this bill, or really two things in this bill, two issues. The issue, first thing you got to understand, what are we addressing? And all we're addressing is when rulemaking exceeds its authority and goes into making law. That is our job in the General Assembly, to make law. Whether it's creating new law or changing existing law. And if a rule goes beyond that, what are we going to do about it? And granted, in the workers' comp world, the last few years haven't seen as much of that as we did before. But we've been talking about this for over 6 years now, several years before the Tillery Amendment. So all 474 says now, and we pared it all out to make sure you understand, it says we're going to make the law. It doesn't touch the advisory council. It doesn't take away authority from the board. It doesn't change anything about how a rule is made. But we're going to see it, and if it's more than a rule and it becomes, it's about changing law, how are we going to address it? How are we going to push the pause button? And that's all that's in there right now. It says we're going to put some daylight on there. We're going to get 30 days to look at the bill, or look at a rule. We don't care how it gets to us. We're going to email it to Legislative Council in case the chairmans are going around the world on a cruise. We don't want to sit in a mailbox in South Georgia. So Legislative Council gets it, that starts a clock. I don't care, 7 days, 30 days, doesn't matter. Silence is acceptance. If everything's cool, we just go on. No big deal. We haven't changed anything on that. Nothing. But we see somebody say, look, this is changing law. This is creating new law. Oop, we got to have a pause button. What is that pause button? That's us. We're going to say, wait, time out. Now, the third part of this is resolution. And sometimes I think good ideas and good law are always the same thing. And I've thought about this, and I don't really have that in the bill yet. Because I think for the most part, between the committee here and the committee in the Senate and the Work Comp Board, we ought to be able to work out any differences. If we think something's changing a law and not a rule, that we can work together and get it resolved. And that's what the bill says. And I know that's what it says because we do have the best counsel in North America working on it. And so what it says is that. And in all this nonsense about it's blowing up the advisory council, it's changing the way things are done, are not true, never have been true. We had a meeting in the interim after the session with the Tillery Amendment, and I've gone back and thought about that. Our position was the same then, but we really didn't have much time to talk about it because all you did was holler at us and tell us what idiots we were, and you haven't listened to what we're saying. If a body such as a board, an agency, or anybody else exceeds their authority and gets into lawmaking, they've gone above and beyond what they're supposed to do. And in the state of Georgia workers' comp system, what are we going to do about that? And that's all 474 talks about. I was actually at one time thought, I said, yeah, go ahead, talk against it. First thing you need to tell me is why you think somebody other than the General Assembly should make law. Second thing is, why do you think it should be done in closed doors, nobody see it till it's adopted, if it's a rule? Because that's kind of how it's been working. In some ways, that's actually how it did work. We've used 240 and 200.2 because one's more claimant-friendly, one's more employer-friendly, and those that are really involved in the work comp world understand that. because I wanted to make sure we're not talking from a claimant side or an employer side. It's just about the General Assembly saying, if the board is making law, what are we gonna do about it? You know, I use the Manford Man analogy of revved up like a deuce, another runner and night, because that's probably the most misquoted line in music history. And this is, to me, of everything I've been with in 5 terms, this is the most misquoted bill I've ever been associated with. I've heard so many things about what this bill does and doesn't do, and that's all it does. So we want to look at 3 things. Before a rule goes into effect, we need to see it. I think 30 days notice is fine, adequate. You may say a week's, that's fine too. We're all busy, but during the interim, we can do things in a hurry if we have to. Somebody said we'll put it on the website. That's cool too. I don't care. I think electronic version's the best way. I think it's better than snail mail because there is a date and a time, and when it goes to legislative council, they hit a reply button, it starts the clock, whatever the clock is. And again, if no response in 30 days or 7 days or 14 days or whatever you think might be right, silence is acceptance. And it's good. Go on. It's then adopted. If it's not, then we hit the pause button. It's not adopted on that thing if we hit the pause button. What do? I think we just get together in a meeting and we talk about it. And I think, because there's a fine line often in the nuances. One word in a comma can change something from a rule to a law or a law to a rule. And everybody in this room knows that. But we can sit down and talk about it, and I think for the most part we can work. Now, we can come in here, and I do have the bills that Legislative Council did. Repeal 240, make it null and void. Repeal 200.2, make it null and void. I got the third one you gave me. I didn't bring it with me. That just simply says if a rule doesn't have a basis in law, it's null and void, and we'll let the ALJs play with that one and the lawyers. But all that does is add chaos. You know, we have the authority if some rule goes way beyond rule and goes into lawmaking to come in here the next January by statute and fix it. But that just adds chaos to the system. We don't want to add chaos. If we have an issue with it before it becomes a part of the system and we can fix it and work together, it takes the chaos out. And that's the goal. And I really, like I said, I don't believe the people who sign these letters believe that somebody other than the General Assembly should make law. But I don't think they were told that. It's what the bill's about. And I think some people got so upset about the Tillery Amendment. They haven't throttled back yet. When I have people start telling me I don't know what my own bill's about because of the tad glasses they're wearing, you know, it's an issue. Now, there may be another resolution. I don't know how formal you want to do it. The other irritating thing to me is when we left here in March of last year, I firmly believed we had a commitment from a group of you all that we would have a bill on our desk day one. That's to quote somebody. Didn't happen. Again, the tag glasses took over and they just, we're just going to oppose this. Like, all right, what are we going to do about these little, this is a little simple thing. If it goes into making law, how do we pause it and what's the resolution? Met with some, it could be done by board rule. I agree with that too. It could be done by board. The board could put in a rule to do this same stuff. They're going to send it to Legislative Council, post it on their website. If we respond back, then here's what we're going to do to resolve the differences. Board rule can do it. It doesn't matter. I think both of them are, I don't know which one's more workable or less workable. I don't know if there is a difference, whether it's board rule or statute. Statute may be a little more permanent, has a little more weight to it. But if the board follows a rule, they follow the rule. If they don't, they don't. And maybe in the rule itself, then we put what happens if they don't follow it, that it just doesn't, you know, I mean, you know, how far do you want to pin them down? I don't know. That's why the resolution part I haven't really put in here. But, you know, on the bill itself now, it just simply says 30-day notice to us through Legislative Council, and we got a pause button. That's all it's about. And I'm sorry, there's a lot of people who've been told it's a lot about a lot of different stuff than that. I know because I got it in writing. There's one of them in here, and it actually, it's got the letters HB, and it's got the number 474, and I read all this, and I said, okay, well, where's anything about the bill? That's the only thing about the bill in the whole piece of paper was the letters and numbers. The rest of it had nothing to do with what we've been talking about. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions from either side at the podium that you want to allow, Mr. Chairman, or however you want to do it.
All right, let's do this. If the committee members have questions, I'm gonna allow them to ask, and then I'll ask Mr. Potter to come talk, and then, committee members can ask questions, and then we'll see if anybody else wants to speak. So Chairman Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, this may be a legislative council question, or you can tackle it if you want to. On line 67 of the bill, the word objection there, what constitutes an objection? What action has to be taken by this committee for it to constitute an objection? And like I said, that may be something Ledge Council may have defined somewhere else, but I was just curious.
Unless the legislative council has something different, we would think same as any action of the committee, a majority vote, a majority of the committee members think this is now moving into the lawmaking instead of rulemaking.
So in your opinion, it would take a committee action?
Committee action and a majority of the committee, either here on the House. And the other thing, and by the way, if I really wanted to mess with you, it wouldn't even be these committees. I would have put it in judiciary. Put these rules down in the land of misfits and see what comes out, you know?
That
But we
committee,
didn't do that.
that committee's a mess.
I know.
The other question is, I'm somewhat familiar, I think, with other processes that go on with our ability to have oversight over regulation of agencies.
Mhm.
And that generally involves that agency, I think, and this is where Ms. Story may come in, that agency notifies the chair of the committee like you have here. That chairman can call a meeting of the committee. That committee can vote by a majority to stay or stop those regulations until such time as the General Assembly comes back into session. And then the General Assembly has an opportunity to act to overturn those regulations. And the committee process is simply a stay. Is that what this does, or does this allow the committee itself just by
It doesn't
objection
spell,
to
spell
stop
it
the-
out exactly like that. What you're referring to, of course, is the APA, the Administrative Procedures
Right.
Act, that the State Board of Workers' Comp doesn't fall under. It's never been our intent to put them under. I know in the original Tillery Amendment, he referenced just a small portion of that talked about exactly what you're talking about. That's, when we talk about, there's not anything that says resolution in here. That resolution could be a good one, that all we're doing is putting the pause button on until we get back in January and see where it goes. But at the same time, I think a lot of times, their efforts of the advisory council, their rule committee, to the state board, and the fact that maybe we just need to tweak a word or two and then still put that rule in effect sooner than the next session, I think ought to be something that we want to keep in there. We don't want to slow down the process. We just don't want to put chaos in the process.
Thank you.
Representative Gilligan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Kirby. I'm just curious, how different is this board and how it is sending information to the standing committees and the other state boards that we have that do the work of the state for us?
Well, the biggest difference is the APA. Most all agencies, and I know the chairman was working on a list, and I don't know, there's just a very few things that we deal with that aren't under the Administrative Procedures Act, all right?
Okay.
The State Board of Workers' Comp is funded from a percentage of the insurance premiums. One of the TAD comments is that we're not a stakeholder as the state. Well, I checked with our budget office. They've been recognized nationally for an outstanding job. Took them a little while, and they came back. They added it all up. $100,100,000 in work comp premiums in the budget this year. I think we're a stakeholder with our percentage going to fund the state board. Matter of fact, I bet we're the largest single stakeholder on that side of the ledger, to be honest. But they're not under the Procedures Act. Right now, they can make a rule, adopt it, and that's the first time we see it. Nobody under the APA can do that. We're not still wanting to put them under the APA. Don't, that's another one of those misconceptions out there, but it is totally different than what the others are doing or can do.
Okay, so thank you for that clarity. I appreciate it. Thank you again.
And I just want to add a couple comments, both Chairman Fleming and your question. and that's why we're not going to take a vote. So the resolution part, we're still working on, and I'm going to make sure that all the stakeholders who have an interest in this get to have input, because, and let me clarify another misconception or perception of, or an argument against us, our involvement. So a couple of questions, and yours is a little bit easier. So, you know, of the three branches of government, judicial, executive, and legislative, none of the judicial branches are under the APA, and that's what makes our state workers' comp board a little bit different. They are mostly judicial, even though they're a lot of people consider them an executive branch. They are judicial, and so that's why they're exempt. And again, to emphasize what he said, we're not trying to put them under that. And then as far as resolution, the reason we're having a lot of discussions is, and I tell folks all the time, you know, when we're doing our typical Rotary Club speeches, I've been a business guy for 30-something years, and then you get elected, and all of a sudden I'm supposed to be a expert in education, insurance, child care, pretty long list. And fortunately, most of us recognize how short our knowledge is on that. And then you put that against the advisory council, who sends stuff to the board, and it's 110 people that have unbelievable knowledge. And we've got people from the medical community, insurance, attorneys, claimant attorneys, defense attorneys. There's a lot of knowledge, and so we do want to be careful that. And I think that's some of the concerns of one side, is that that we could just quickly, by simple majority, say, oh, we don't like that because somebody got in the ear of 7 or 8 of us and said, no, don't let them do that. And so we want to be very careful and set the bar very high and have a very high hurdle for us to undo a rule that they have spent months and months of listening to experts on the council. And so we get that. So I want to make that very clear. You know, this is not about micromanaging or us trying to do their job. And so we've heard that very clear. So who we got? Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Chairman. So I guess my first question is, do you believe that worker comp in the state of Georgia has been working well for the last 25, 30 years?
It's one of the better systems in the United States.
Okay.
I've dealt with workers' comp on the business level in probably 16 or 17 different states. I would just as soon be doing it in Georgia, whether from the employee or employer's side. And normally I'm on the employer, but
Right.
in the employee side as well, it's one of the most fair systems that's equally balanced. Is it perfect? No, and this is one of the issues has been when, okay, they've changed the law a little different here than what the law said. Not a big deal, not a lot of times, but when it happens, and we don't have anything to do to deal with it yet.
I guess my concern is they've tried to take the politics out of the board, and now it's like we're trying to put the politics back in the board. And so it's I'm afraid, even though we're not putting them under the standard that you're talking about the other boards being under across the state, as you open that Pandora's box, in effect you're actually doing that. As we start to veto rule changes, then that completely disbands what they're doing.
I wouldn't use the word veto. I say we'll hit the pause button because we still need to find a resolution after we pause it.
I got you. But I mean, it says clearly, if it's adoption, the proposed rule shall not be adopted. So to me, that's veto. But
well, at that date, you know, when a rule is put out to be adopted on such and such date, we hit the pause button. It's not adopted on that date. But we're happy to wordsmith it to make you more comfortable with that part.
Representative Park.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Kirby, thank you for bringing the bill. So just to kind of take a step back, given that I do not have too much experience in workman's comp, can you give me an example of a rule? Are we talking something procedural that applies to the board and advisory council, something substantive, or as Chairman Werkheiser referenced, more of a judicial determination?
Well, they got a whole list of rules. You know, like anything else, a rule should be to help them administer the law as we write it, and to make it effective and without changing it or adding to it. And that's probably the thing we've seen the most where it was added to it. And a good example, I put 240 on there, dealing with light duty. And essentially, if you read the first paragraph in the law, it says if an injured worker goes to the doctor and the doctor releases them to light duty with some type of restrictions, and the employer says, I can meet those restrictions, come on to work, and the employee just says, no, I'm not going to work under light duty, then they're not entitled to indemnity benefits or lost wages because they're the ones refusing to work. What the board then did is start adding to it with this form and having it go back to the doctor and certificate. And it takes about a 2-week process before, you know, and finally the doctor signs off on it and you get everything back, and then, you know, the poor guy's been out of work, he's not, you know, and you created an animosity between two sides, and it never was intended to put all this extra stuff and extra steps in there. It should be pretty simple.
So
That's just an easy example.
So if it is more substantive and not so much judicial, why doesn't the Georgia APA apply to this rulemaking process?
Well, I think you go back to the funding mechanism. They are not an agency. Even though by statute, and Bobby's better at this than I am, they are officially in the executive branch under statute in 34.9, aren't they? Yeah. So they are an executive branch, all right, but they're not funded by the budget like we do agencies. So they don't really belong in the APA, and I don't think they do belong in there. Now, there are some in this room think they should be under the APA, which I think that's a little bit more and gives maybe the state, I guess, for lack of a better word, more control over than they should have. But I can assure you there's some others out here could probably tell you, I think they should be under the APA, and here's why, but I don't think they should.
And just last point and comment, I think I do share Representative Carpenter's concerns with the language as it's currently written, because it does seem to be more of a veto power, and I think wanting to strike a good balance in terms of respecting the expertise of the advisory council and ensuring there is proper legislative oversight to ensure that lawmaking authority does retain with duly elected representatives is a key balance that I hope we will be able to strike. But thank you for the bill, sir.
And that's, you know, when we had our discussion yesterday and said we don't want to do the vote, you know, we left here feeling we had a commitment for legislation. We've also at times felt we had a commitment for a board rule. We wanted to say, all right, we're not voting on, let's give everybody in this room up here, out here, time to come to us with, okay, here to address your 3 things of daylight, pause button, resolution, here's how we do it. And we'll wordsmith it all day and work with everybody to make sure we're comfortable doing it.
Representative Kennard.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Kirby, I want to make sure I had that acronym just right. That was TADS?
TADS, T-A-D-S.
Okay.
Artillery Amendment Derangement Syndrome. And I did check with the senator and make sure he wouldn't get upset using that, and he said that's fine with him. So,
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, TAD glasses, you know, see through the TAD glasses, whatever, so.
Okay, seeing no more questions, I'm going to ask that Bobby Potter come up and give us some perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I think. So I am Bobby Potter. I have chaired the legislative committee of the advisory committee for a while. I don't really recall how long, probably more than 10 years, less than 20. I've practiced in this area since 1977, so I've dealt with it for a long time. The chairman and I talked about it, about not touting the virtues of the advisory committee. He has done that. I would just say that for those of you who may not know, the advisory committee includes stakeholders across the board. There are clearly some people in the room that think they should be more involved, or some individuals would like to be in and not, and some folks rotate on and some folks rotate off. It's the chairman's advisory committee. appointed by the chairman of the State Board of Workers' Compensation. The members provide guidance to the State Board of Workers' Compensation. They do not come up with rules and say, here are the rules, and pass them. They don't come up with legislation and come to you and say, here's the legislation. They advise the State Board of Workers' Compensation, the state agency, on a number of things, including proposed legislation and rules. And there are 4 other committees, and they deal with various other aspects of rehabilitation among them, managed care. There's other aspects of this. It is a significant state agency. So last year, Representative Kirby introduced House Bill 474. I did not use and would not use the term snarky nor spiteful. That came from Representative Kirby. I would say and would use the term that the tension was significant. It dated back some before that time. And the rhetoric over the last several days has been pretty elevated. Doesn't need to be, but it has been. I wouldn't have used the syndrome name. He attached something to it. But to me, notwithstanding Representative Kirby's view that this is a simple bill and this is all it does, and this is all he wanted it to do, lots of times here, bills are read in different ways from different perspectives. Happens every day. So I wouldn't call it a syndrome, but I would say this. I have had it as Representative Kirby has said. He's in the business community. He's an HR guy for a big business. The trial lawyers, a number of those folks, are very interested in rulemaking authority, and one of the checklist items has been the Administrative Procedures Act for some years. So this isn't in a vacuum. But there's an irony associated with it, but the impetus of this bill that came from Representative Kirby came from a different spot than is from some of the members in the audience. As he and I had talked, and we have had some significant conversation, particularly in the last few days, and then once a month or two ago in Monroe, as I hear him, which may be different than what he's thinking, but as I hear it, much of the impetus came from Rule 240, a board rule that provides some clarity and rulemaking procedure relative to OCGA 34.9/240. And as he indicated, that has to do with return to work, and particularly return to work on light duty. It sounds simple. It is a very complex part of this statute. I'm looking and thinking of several of the folks in the audience that represent claimants all day, every day, and I suspect none would disagree with that. There's some complexities associated with what is exactly light duty, who said what to whom, how much do you have to lift, how long can you do that. My client can't do that. They need babysitting arrangements in order to go back to work. We don't need a job offer on a Friday to show up on a Monday. They need more time to think about that. Many of those things, and multitudes beyond what I'm thinking of right now, were discussed by a rules committee some years ago that provided the recommendation on Board Rule 240 to flesh out some of the statute, to give some flesh to the complexity of a return to work with light duty, how that works in the system. Can it be done by form? What's the notice? Claimant lawyers are clearly associated with a number of these cases. Need to be, have to be. It's understandable. They're concerned about that. From the standpoint of Representative Kirby, I get it. That is a person that is in between him and his employee. That's a fact of life. That's just part of it. But it's one of the complexities that the board has to deal with, and we all deal with. So from that perspective, if that's the impetus, that is 34.9/240, that says something about return to work, light duty, get a slip from the doctor, send them back to work. You ought to be able to do that. There are many complexities associated with that are fleshed out in the board rule. Did the board rule expand beyond the statute, which I think is the determination of Representative Kirby some years ago when that passed? This is not new. And there was a 10-day notice period that the claimant lawyers in this room would have advocated for and appreciated. And frankly, I think the employee representatives understand that that's a significant factor. If somebody's been out of work for whatever it is, 3 months, 6 months, 2 months, there's a time factor to adjust with that. So I say that from the standpoint of the background of what I think is the impetus from Representative Kirby's perspective. He gave 2 examples. 240 was one of those. That would just be from my reflection on that, that there's some complexity to that. The bill last year, as you have heard, was not in a vacuum, and there's a syndrome associated with it apparently now. But from the real life perspective in the hall, and then at the State Board of Workers' Compensation, and in the advisory committee, 2 years ago when there was a Day 40 amendment that essentially dealt with this same subject matter about portions of the Administrative Procedure Act and rulemaking authority of the board. That lives on today in the halls, and it's difficult. That bill was vetoed by Governor Deal. And like it or not, it continues to live on, certainly with the tension level associated with conversation about that. It's involved at the State Board of Workers' Compensation. It's involved in the business community. It's involved in the letter that you all have seen, and I will get to that point in a moment. And I would say this, even 2 years ago, with the Day 40 amendment, when that passed, I got a call the next day from a friend of mine who practices claimants law for a living, and has done it for some time, is engaged in WCCL, and his first words besides hello was, "I didn't do it." So there was that floating around at that point, and it has carried on to this day. 474, same subject matter, absolutely different source, but it's part of this process. So last year, Representative Wertheiser referred that bill to the advisory committee. We've had significant conversation in the last couple of days. I think the perception was that was a softball to you guys to handle that and come back to us. Honestly, Representative Kirby, I don't remember chapter and verse that you would come back with a bill covering these 3 items. May have been, but from the standpoint of looking at the bill, this advisory committee has done that, and I'll mention that in just a minute. So we got here, this legislative session started, no bill, no new bill. So I want to reference what I have sent out to this legislative committee and advisory committee. Before I do that, just a couple of observations and then clarifications about some of the tension, some histrionics, and some misstatements that have been floating around the last few days. And then just clarity that the State Board of Workers' Compensation is a significant agency that oversees all injuries on the job in the state of Georgia, and a few outside the state relative to the jurisdiction. But it's a big deal. It includes a significant judicial function. A couple of you all members have referenced that, and I appreciate that aspect of it. I think that is one of the reasons that it, in fact, is not under the Administrative Procedures Act. Neither are our Court of Appeals or Supreme Court or Superior Courts. Secondly, and it was referenced, I think, the State Board of Workers' Compensation is not funded by taxpayer dollars. It is funded by payors in the system, employers and self-insurers. That's where the money comes from. It flows through appropriations. It flows through the budget, but that is the source. Actually, more than that comes from it and goes to other parts of the state government. That is probably one of the reasons, Representative Park, that it's a little different than other state agencies, at least from that perspective. Thirdly, the state, the state legislature has given rulemaking authority to the board many years ago in 34-959, that the board is authorized and directed to pass rules to implement the statute. It's fairly clear cut. It's been in there for many years. Part of the rule associated with that, passed by the board, is that the board will send the legislature proposed rules before they are adopted. So that gets me to 3 things I want to clarify. In the last couple of months, the indication is they don't do that. I mean, I know they're supposed to do that. They say they do that. They don't do that. And then I hear that. I'll talk to the state board and say, we do that. We send it over there. And I'll hear back, they don't do that. We haven't gotten it. We've checked. So I talked to the chairman earlier today, this chairman McKay and that chairman Werkheiser, to indicate here's the correspondence sending the proposed rules to the respective chairs. And this is just some names that you will recall through time. Chairman Golden, Tim Golden, Chairman Mark Hamilton, another to Golden, Hamilton, Jason Shaw, Charlie Bethel, Brian Strickland, Burt Jones, Bill Werkheiser, another Burt Jones, over time back 6 years. That's part of the rhetoric, maybe not the syndrome, but part of the rhetoric that was associated with this conversation. They're a rogue agency. They just do what they want to do. Well, that honestly, that's not the case. It's a responsive agency that deals with a whole lot of stuff, and the pressures that you all hear from one side or the other, this agency hears all the time. They get it from the claimant lawyer side. They get it from the employer side. They get it with a decision. That wasn't right. That wasn't fair to me. That wasn't fair to my group. They're not going to pass a rule and blow it off and say, we're not going to send it over to the legislature. They have done that. So that's the first of those. I had heard that you all had received a missive from the Georgia Workers' Compensation Association opposing House Bill 474. Representative Kirby just mentioned that. He was not happy with that. He used his own terms about that. We had that conversation. Some people thought that came from the State Board of Workers' Compensation, from the agency. It did not. So let me clarify that. Second item, that came from a group of employers, a coalition of that, on one side of the fence on this issue. Not unlike what you all would receive on a variety of issues. It did not come from the state agency. And then lastly, the thought, and I heard it, and we've talked about it. I talked to Chairman Werkheiser and Representative Kirby at some length about that. We sent this to you guys. We gave you the softball a year ago, and you didn't do anything. In fact, and you can fill in the gap in terms of the rhetoric. You blew us off. You said, we're not interested. Leave us alone. Those were some of the comments. And the truth is, this is a big deal issue. We very much appreciate, I know the state agency did, the folks in the advisory committee appreciated that thought to refer it, and that occurred, and the advisory committee took it up and reviewed it. Then there were some things that were happening after that. So I sent a note in early January to the legislative committee. That's probably made its way beyond that, bringing them up to date on what has occurred. And I want to share that with you all, just to let you know that it was this didn't go into a dark hole and never come back. There was activity associated with it. And in presenting this, I also want to make it clear, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. I just want to indicate this is not an easy process. It's not easy for you all. It's not easy for the advisory committee. So when I sent this, it was to the legislative committee members. The legislature's about to commence this next week. There was some preliminary information about that, and this was an update. We had a meeting in September. We had a meeting on October 30 and November 1 in St. Simons. Legislative committee report. This is what was sent out. The committee spent some time discussing the process itself, the efforts to, in quotes, work around the advisory committee or work against it. We discussed the perception and reality associated with that. We discussed communication amongst the group and outside the group. The committee was advised that the proposed opioid formulary was off the table and that it was taken off the table by Chairman McKay. The committee acknowledged the significant effort expended by members of the medical committee to get to a work product, but also acknowledged that the concept was fraught with political dynamics. Y'all were spared that. At the end of the day, the advisory committee process worked to reach the conclusion not to proceed with the opioid formulary. The committee next addressed the rulemaking authority of the board. It reviewed and assessed the history of the longstanding authority in the statute. The effort 2 years ago with the Day 40 Amendment to alter that, the introduction of House Bill 474 from last year, and the charge for the Advisory Council to review and assess HB 474. We did that thoroughly, including the APA, the statutory authority granted to the board to formulate the rules to carry out the Workers' Compensation Act, and the need to be nimble to adjust the process when necessary. We agreed unanimously that rulemaking authority should stay with the SBWC and not the legislature. We agreed unanimously that HB 474 was not a good idea and was not necessary. We agreed that there was a need, given recent history and concerns expressed by various stakeholders, that communication of proposed rule changes should be enhanced. An opportunity for input from interested people outside the advisory committee should be afforded before rule implementation. We believe those items can be achieved via a rule change. Rather than just refer the matter back to the Rules Committee, recognizing the dynamics occurring in both committees on this subject, the Legislative Committee within the Advisory Committee will develop and offer some proposed language for a rule change about the rulemaking process. With that, we concluded that there would be no agency legislative package for the 2020 legislative session. That was what was verbally presented at the Advisory Committee meeting in St. Simons, documented by this shortly thereafter, and then sent out to this group. I continued, pursuant to my request at our legislative meeting, several members of the committee worked to craft a board rule to address the concerns reflected in this report, particularly to provide notice of a proposed rule and an opportunity for input beyond just the members of the Rules Committee, while avoiding the political implications and realities of House Bill 474 or the Administrative Procedures Act, from which the State Board of Workers' Compensation has been exempt. I appreciate very much the efforts in that regard attached as a draft of that proposal. On December 17, 2019, an email was received from one of those members in that unnamed subcommittee who indicated the following, quote, "The consensus position of the claimants bar is that change to the board rulemaking procedure cannot be resolved by rule." Close quote. It appears that members of the claimants bar organization wish to pursue and support HB 474 or some iteration thereof and have expressed that view to Chairman Werkheiser. Meanwhile, a business coalition has formed opposing 474 and supporting the advisory committee process, and that view has been expressed to Chairman Werkheiser. As reported in my summary from St. Simons, I believe HB 474 was referred to the advisory committee for review and assessment. We did that. It would be my intention, if called upon, which I have been, to respond on behalf of the legislative committee or the advisory committee what is presented in the highlighted report, which I presented to you all from St. Simons, the work on the proposed rule thereafter, the aftermath in terms of that email, and the development of this business coalition, which heightened the tension. I conclude this by saying, while we discussed at length at the beginning of the legislative committee meeting, which we did, the discussions inside and out, these continue to play out. And while that I said and concluded that is exceedingly disappointing, I remain convinced that the advisory committee process is worth the effort for the overall system. And with that, Chairman, I attached a proposed Rule 59 that, and a proposed Rule 60. It tweaks 60 because much of the content in 60 would stay in place. Rule 59 would flesh out the rulemaking authority, and it would provide notice, at least 30 days, an opportunity for input, publication on the website at least 30 days in advance of a proposed rule, confirming sending a proposed rule over to the legislature. This says to the chairman of the respective committees, it could change as Chairman Kirby and I had talked to the Legislative Council. That's kind of in the weeds one way or the other. But it covers everything discussed except the pause button, as Representative Kirby said, or the veto button, as Representative Carpenter said. But that is the proposed rule. It was available in November in form. There was not total buy-in. That happened. That did, in fact, put the pause button on that. That brought us to the legislative position, so I wanted to let you all know that's what was going on. And that was the recommendation from the legislative committee to the advisor, to the rest of the advisory committee presented and to the state board. So that's my update and report.
Chairman Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Counselor,
Yes, sir.
I think you stated a reason why the Administrative Procedures Act should not apply to the Workers' Compensation Commission. Similarly, because even though it's, I believe, an executive branch agency, it's more of a judicial body, and we
Yes,
as a
sir.
legislature can pass statutes, but we don't review rules generally of the court system. I think that's a valid
Yes, sir.
point. However, as I understand the Administrative Procedures Act, it is not a simple process for we as a legislative body to overturn an agency's rulemaking authority.
It is not.
It takes a 2/3 vote of a committee, I think. And that only stays the rule. It may take a majority, but it only stays the rule until the next legislative session. But it does take a 2/3 vote of both the House and the Senate to overturn a rule. So I've been here 20 years and I don't remember it happening. I remember us talking about doing it, and then the agency backed off on it after a committee took action. So why is there so much hesitancy, I guess would be the question, for the Workers' Comp Board to have to come under the same potential, maybe not this legislation, but come under the APA, such as other agencies do?
So, Chairman Fleming, I think it's part of the tension, the rhetoric associated with the whole thing over the last 3 years, that it provides a layer, and then it provides an opportunity to politicize more than it already is the case. Representative Carpenter mentioned that. It can shift politics. It already has to some degree. That would be the concern. It's not a throwaway line to say it's worked really well for all these years. Obviously, in a couple of instances with some people, in their mind, it hasn't worked right. But beyond that, as Representative Kirby would say, he's practicing all these states in this law, and this is a pretty good one. It is imperfect. From my view, and I suspect the State Board of Workers' Compensation, it is that it has worked well the way it is. And if there's a concern about a rule, talk to us, and we can fix
If
it.
I may follow up one question, Mr. Chairman. And I guess on the other side of the equation, it shouldn't be lost that every time you say a rule number, it's because it's associated with the statute that covers that area.
Yes, sir.
And the legislature does have the ability to, pass a statute change and send it to the governor if he would consider it as well.
Absolutely. And
Which is ultimate oversight authority, I guess, in some ways.
it is. We had that conversation yesterday. You can, and Representative Kirby has a couple in his pocket. Apparently, he could just introduce that at any time.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Representative Bonner.
Thank you. Mr. Potter, is there anything now that would prevent either an individual or a group to challenge in court a rule adopted by the board?
No, sir. I appreciate you asking that. And we had that conversation over the last couple of days as well. One of the safeguards is just the natural judicial process. If there's a party offended by the ultimate decision in a given case in the state board, and it is because of an interpretation of a rule, that can occur, and it could go up to Superior Court and then to our Court of Appeals challenging the validity of the rule. That is absolutely available now. It's part of the judicial process.
And in terms of current procedure, prior to a rule being adopted, it is advertised for some period of time.
Advertised depends on what the term would. I'm not sure it's advertised in the sense. I guess I would.
In the sense
Par-
that it,
parse
in
that.
the
It's not
sense that
paper.
in the sense that it is available to the public in some form or fashion.
It is provided. It is provided to the legislature 30 days in advance. It is provided to the folks that are on the Rules Committee, and reflective of those organizations. Each person there has the opportunity to provide that to their constituency. It is not, as I hear your words advertised, it's not advertised.
Is there anything that would prevent the board from publicly I mean, even something as simple as putting proposed rule changes on the website?
No, sir. That is part of this discussion, and that is part of the proposed Rule 59. Is that makes it easy enough in this electronic age. Put it on the website, and whoever needs to or wishes to see it, click of the button, and they can do that.
Representative Carter? Sorry.
Thank you, Representative Kirby, for the information that you shared, and thank you for the details and helping us get some clarity. I only have one area that I would like to be clear on as it relates to what the current law is and the proposed. In this, I believe you said that you all currently provide the legislature rule changes
Yes, ma'am.
prior to a change.
Right.
This bill is asking for the rules to be sent to the legislature and a pause for 30 days. Now, what I'm not clear is the current process, is it just a formality that the rule is provided to the legislature, and then, let me stop right there. Is it a formality?
Okay.
And then in this legislation, with the 30-day pause, what happens? Because Representative Kirby, you're saying there's a pause, and my friend over here is saying that there's veto power, so something's going to happen. So can you clear that up for me, like
Yes,
what
ma'am.
the current process and after the 30 days in this legislation, so I can,
So,
yeah.
Yes.
so current process right now, proposed rules are sent to the respective chairs. That's what this is, 30 days in advance. There is no pause button, but in the current rule, if either chair said, we would like you, State Board of Workers' Compensation, to hold a hearing on that rule, that's in there to flesh that out. To my knowledge, that hasn't happened, but that's in there now. So, and there's so within those 30 days, Chairman Werkheiser or Chairman Jones could email or pick up the phone or say, I have some concerns about this, and I expect conversation would follow. But from the formality standpoint, there could be the request for a hearing to be held on that rule. That's the way it is right now. In this proposal, there's a 30-day window as well. So none of that has really changed. And you've heard the conversation about a pause button or what is really, the rule will not go into effect, which it's not really a veto, but it's pretty close to it, as it's written right now. So those are the changes that I see right now. And honestly, in real life, if this has occurred over time, the chairman of the respective committees literally, I would think, the chairman of the agency would pick up the phone and say, either I have some concerns about this, some members of my committee has expressed concerns about this, or some members of the public have come to me and expressed some concerns about this. And I would ask that you have them hold a hearing.
Okay.
So that could happen right now.
Okay. So let's follow, if that process, they were concerned, you held the hearings, you get some feedback, you pass the rule. Nothing stops us from coming back, or does it, from
Undoing it.
undoing it.
No, ma'am. Nothing would stop the legislature now. It'd be the next session.
Right.
Or the upcoming one. Rules generally go into effect on July 1. So
Yes.
half year later, you could say, we want to pass a bill and undo that.
Okay.
And boy,
And then if we move forward with this bill with the 30-day pause, pause and wants the discussion and what happens then.
Well, it's not fleshed out in the bill, and I think that was some of the
Okay.
questions that Representative Kirby
Okay.
had addressed to him. It's the last paragraph in the bill that says it won't go into effect. And then the question is what happens then, and that's really not in the bill.
Thank
So I
you.
don't know the answer to that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Doreen. Representative Gilligan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I realize we're pressed for time. A couple of times you've referenced, Mr. Potter, a Day 40 legislation. I'm assuming you mean 2017.
Sounds right.
Day 40? So it wasn't last year, Day
Correct.
40. It was
Right.
Correct.
the
2017.
prior year, Day 40.
That's right.
And obviously that did not pass, but I'm trying to figure out if something was, it did? It did?
The
It was
governor
vetoed, I'm
vetoed it.
sorry, it was vetoed.
Yeah.
So that did not go into effect.
Correct.
But there was something that we were trying to address even in 2017, we're trying to address in 2018. Can you tell me what we're trying to address, what the problem is we're trying to fix, and what can we do to fix the problem that we're trying to fix?
You know, I wish I knew the exact answer to that, but I would tell you this, based on the input that I have heard about notice and opportunity to be heard, and people that want a hand in fashioning and crafting and saying, having say-so about a board rule, that is what this advisory committee tried to address at St. Simons and present in Rule 59 that you've not yet seen, that I presented to Representative Kirby and Representative Werkheiser. That is a piece of that. Now, having talked to Representative Kirby, there's a different slice of from his perspective, a problem, and that would be that conversation about pause or veto and what that is. That is stopping a rule from going into effect. And what he's indicated here was, I think his position is state board or advisory committee, whoever you are, you don't pass the laws, we do. And I promise you, I sort of deliver that same message every time we're together. We understand that. And I tell the advisory committee, our job is to advise the state board. And I said, we don't pass laws either. But that's the message that he's been giving that I've heard with some clarity over the last couple of days. I think his group gets that.
Okay.
So to address the concerns that we were dealing with at St. Simons, we believe we have a document that would help that. It's a new board rule 59, particularly with notice opportunity to be heard and sending these proposed rules to the legislature 30 days in advance.
We hope we're close to answering that question. All right, Representative Holly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Representative Kirby, and thank you, Mr. Potter, for especially being very thorough to explain it, to ensure that people see that it, too often times people get a knee-jerk reaction when it, I think from your presentation, it seems like that this is really just to support a measure of transparency. And I know particularly when I look at line 52, it's just very simple that, nothing in this is meant to repeal or diminish additional requirements. I was wondering, from your careful talking with the business community about this, particularly for those members of the board, do you find that maybe the apprehension is not that speaks to what this bill attempts to do, but really that it's creating in their minds a slippery slope of things to come?
That could be entirely possible. I'm not going to speak for the entire business community, but there have been a number of concerns that they had expressed about this, really tied in, as several have said, relative to the Day 40 amendment before.
Okay.
And that kind of slippery slope.
But for this right now, just for the matter at hand, especially with the resolution that's forthcoming, it's simply just to make sure that the legislature is that we have the authority to in terms of making those rules before. I mean, is that what it is? It really just is the process itself. Is this attempting to improve it to make it more transparent?
I think so.
Okay.
I think I think it is transparent. Others think it is not, so it would be, I think it helps make it more transparent,
Okay.
particularly with notice to others beyond this advisory committee, with the opportunity for input, and to confirm the legislature sees it 30 days in advance.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Park?
Thank you, Chairman Werkheiser. So, Mr. Potter, thank you so much for your thorough testimony again. So it seems as if there is some agreement in terms of ensuring there is notice, and of course, if there is reporting requirements to the legislature for there to be oversight. The question that did come to mind was, there does seem to be a fairly big difference between a rule versus a law. Of course, if everyone can agree upon notice being a good thing, where is the harm in that being codified? Where is the harm in rules being sent to the legislature for there to be that pause button? Of course, with lines 66 to 68 being modified, you mentioned in your testimony the need to be nimble in the rulemaking process.
Yes, sir.
And of course, for the business community's sake, and certainty is a critical component of that. I think one of the things that I've heard that would be helpful is to ensure that during this rulemaking process, there aren't arbitrary individuals who are able to, by their own volition, choose to move forward or not, without, again, some input from stakeholders. So if this bill is modified such that it incorporates the rule that the board seems to have incorporated or has adopted already, Rule 59, regarding the 30-day notice process, and modifies language such that it simply codifies in our state law the ability for the legislature to have oversight, would there be this similar opposition? Because again, at least in terms of how I read it, if this provision is modified, I don't see how that would undermine the work of the advisory council.
If the proposed board rule is
Codified in
50
state law.
59 is codified. So part of that would be part of the, whatever it is, syndrome or concern or hysteria around the Capitol as a statute versus rule. That's part of it. Rules are easier to change than statute, just by process. What you've described in terms of one individual being able to, maybe you didn't use the term slip in, but advance their idea through a rule. In order for a rule to become a rule, it flows through this advisory committee process and that committee, and then goes to the three members of the State Board of Workers' Compensation to vet that before it ever becomes a proposed rule. Then it's sent to you all. Now, you could put all of that in statute. There's whatever, I started to do the count, but there's a bunch of rules. You can make them all statutes, but it's not a wise idea. I think maybe you're talking about the rule-making part of this. And I don't know the answer right now just because of the consternation associated that, whether the solution to this is by rule or by statute. Mm-hmm. And in fact, with these two gentlemen I was talking with yesterday and today, you heard it here. I'm not sure that they know the right, whatever, if there is a right answer to that. Chairman Kirby has indicated he's okay with the rule. And Chairman Werkheiser may be. It just depends on what it says.
If I may follow up, so in terms of that rulemaking process, does there have to be unanimous agreement by the board in order for a rule to become a rule? 2/3 majority? Is there a veto power by the chair?
No, so I don't sit within that group, but I'll try to answer that. The State Board of Workers' Compensation is directed by three individuals who are appointed by the governor. Mm-hmm. So when you say the state board is passing rules, that's really who it is. Now, they've got an administrative law judge who for 20 years has been assigned to the Rules Committee, at least, and has been instrumental in vetting those things and balancing them out. So I'm positive she's engaged in that process, but it's really those three people that decide this is going to be a board rule. Am I right on that? That's a statute, charter that. Right. 34.5, 40. Right. So they have the authority and the obligation to vet and pass rules. So there's 3 of them. I assume it would really, if it was a 2-to-1 fight about it, it could be by majority. I expect all of them are 3-0 over time.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And we're down to our last question. Representative Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Potter, for
Yes, sir.
being here. I guess, I know I spoke quite a long time, but with Representative Gilligan's question, I want to make sure I communicate clearly. I think the underlying issue that's brought all this on, even before the Tillery Amendment we talked about for several years, is what do we do if a rule exceeds being a rule and becomes law? That's always been the underlying issue. And I thought I said that at the beginning, but I want to make sure that was clear. So your comment about the impotence of 240, if you recall, I normally talk about 240 and 200.2 together. I used 240 to answer Representative Park's question, and I did that intentionally as those who are very involved know between those two. One's more claimant-friendly typically, and one's considered more employer-friendly. And I wanted to always use those two because I wanted to make sure everybody knew this is not coming from a claimant side or employer side. This was trying to be more in the middle. So, but that's not the impotence behind this whole bill. But I do got some questions for you. Your legislative or your memorandum to the council, and what you read. You start off. You talked about I hope the question is you now understand that there's never been any intent to work around the advisory committee with this bill.
I understand that you have indicated that to me, and
Yeah.
I believe that.
That was a bad phrase.
What's that?
That was a bad phrase.
That is a.
So
You ought to have been a politician to answer a question without. How about there's never been an intent with 474 to work against the advisory council?
So, as we discussed yesterday, when you use the term, all we want to do is make sure the board doesn't pass laws and pass rules. And we had that conversation. I would suggest you use the pronoun I, because when we say we, who all is that? And what you've referenced here, I do not believe that you had any intent with 474 to work against the advisory committee. I absolutely believe that. But as we have discussed, 474 and portions of that fall in line with one of the agenda items that has been part of the WCCL group, part of whom are on the advisory committee and have been for years and continue to be. But as that group has progressed, and I've been engaged in that, we would share, all right, what do you got? What do you need? What do you need? And that has been on their agenda list for years. So when this came up, that is part of that. And the discussion about that is a little bit outside the advisory committee. That's what we discussed at St. Simons. It was not cast in stones at Tom Kirby for this bill.
Yeah, all right. Further on, you understand now that I, as the author of the bill, have nothing in the bill that affects the long-standing authority and statute for who makes rules.
So, relative to the bill, I would say just as this bill does not say the board does not have the authority to pass laws, nowhere in here will you find that.
Mm-hmm.
They just have the authority to do rules. That there are some implications in this bill that I've discussed that go beyond the content of that bill that potentially adversely affects the advisory committee and the State Board of Workers' Compensation. There's certainly members of that group and clearly members of the business coalition that believe it has some adverse effect, notwithstanding your intentions to the contrary that it wouldn't affect it at all.
And there's absolutely nothing in this bill that, when you say we unanimously agree rulemaking authority stays with the state board, we haven't challenged that.
I understand that, and I understand what you've said, and I would say this: from the time of the conclusion of the legislative committee meeting and the 5 other committee meetings, there was about a 10-minute break, and then people come and give their report to what has just happened. That's the report I gave in that period of time. The rulemaking authority was certainly part of that conversation in the way it was presented. That was, and I hear you, and we have had that discussion about what you're trying to do about the board not exceeding their authority in passing laws. It just was not phrased in that memo that way. We hadn't had this conversation with clarity before that. I have now.
All right. And I didn't copyright Tad's. You can use that if you want. I won't charge you.
I'll pass on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, well, thank you, and fortunately, thank you. Most of us aren't on the clock by the hour, so I think to answer Sherry, Doreen, Sam, we're close, and some people have asked, so what does that last paragraph look like? My email inbox has about 6 versions so far, so I'm getting plenty of input. So hopefully by next week we'll continue to meet and come up with something that all the stakeholders can agree on.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee. That last statement may be a miracle in terms of all stakeholders. We thought we were there in St. Simons, and I indicated I didn't want to throw anybody on the bus, but one of the considerable difficulties is there were people in the room, can they commit their group to a
Right.
position? And it's very difficult if they try to do that or they express their own opinion, say, this is a good idea. I think you guys have, I think you got it here. And then they're told, you said that? You can't do that. We're not doing that. So that's kind of what happened then. And those dynamics are still in play.
Okay. Well, I'll borrow what the speaker told us the other day is some of us may leave this legislative session not getting what we want.
Yes, sir.
So with that, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.